All right, great. Thanks, everyone. All right, thanks for that introduction, Matt. As he mentioned, my name is Eric Santos, and this is a webinar on artificial intelligence in your classroom. It is a huge subject that can easily take a pretty long time, and so we're going to do our best to condense it down and really treat this as an introduction. So you probably have heard about this topic in the news, or maybe you've heard other people talking about it, but we're really going to take the approach that starting from square one, and this is something that's a brand new concept, and we want to introduce you from the beginning. And so if this is something that you're interested in, hopefully you walk away with a little bit of a background, and then potentially in the future, maybe we do a round two of a more advanced version of this as well. So with that said, I wanted to have some music going. I'm going to try to play it. I hope you guys can hear it. If not, no worries. We're just going to pretend like you hear it, but I'm going to have a little intro music going here. And part of why I have that intro music going is because I wanted to start with something that was AI generated, and that music itself was completely AI generated. Hopefully you were able to hear it. It is a product of a website called Beethoven, kind of like Beethoven, but beats. It generates music for you. Just a reminder to, if you did not already, to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and let us know also what's your familiarity level with AI, and let's get that conversation going. And feel free to post questions anytime, answer questions, and go ahead and get that conversation going in the chat. All right, with that said, as Matt mentioned, I'm a regional EdTech coordinator in Chicagoland, 11 years as a STEM and science teacher, tech learning coach for 4 years, and now I'm with the LTC in my 3rd year, as well as all the things that you see there on the screen. So with that said, let's get started talking about AI. You already heard some AI generated music, hopefully, so that kind of leads us into what are we going to talk about today. 4 topics we'll cover. What is artificial intelligence? So when people say that, what does that mean exactly? And also, why is it in the news now, or why is it a hot topic right now? Secondly, what are some everyday uses for ChatGPT? So I'll share with you a particular tool that's most popular right now called ChatGPT and how I've been using it. And then I'll kind of bridge that into how you can use it as an educator in your classroom. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the limits, the limitations and the challenges with AI right now. All right, so with that said, let's get started with what exactly is AI. It might have different meanings or connotations to you based on what you have already heard or may have seen on television or in movies, but let's talk about it in the context that we mean it today. First, a pop quiz. How long do you think artificial intelligence has been around? If you've got a guess, throw it in the chat or just keep it in mind right now. We'll give you about 5 seconds to think. How long has artificial intelligence been around? Well, the answer might surprise you a little bit. Here's a very brief, quick timeline. It dates back to around 1950 when Alan Turing published an article that proposed the idea that machines can think independently on their own. There's a series of breakthroughs that came after that. You might be surprised to see that the first AI program invented is credited as being in the mid-1950s. We had the first chatbot in 1964, and in 1986, the first autonomous automobile. I know for those of you who are AI nerds like me, you might say, hey, you're skipping some things. There's a lot of other events on there, and understandably so. For the sake of time and fitting it all on the slide, I'm going to just pick a few things that were breakthroughs. Some of you who are of a similar age as me might remember when Deep Blue, the supercomputer, beat a grandmaster at chess, and that was a big deal in the news. And then jumping forward to the 2000s, you might see some pictures or some names that you recognize as being AI-powered tools to this day. And so one of the things that stands out when I looked into the history of AI is that there tends to be kind of an ebb and flow of the development of the technology. It shoots to the top as an important technology that has rapid development, and then they have what are called AI winters, where there's just periods where there's not as much investment or not as much development, and a lot of it kind of coincides with the increase in computing power. And so as computers get more powerful, they're able to process more and we have more development. So right now, we've kind of had an explosion of AI tools as a result of the last year when a company called OpenAI released ChatGPT, several different versions of it, as well as an image generator called DALL-E, another one called Crayon hit the public, and they were openly available, and ChatGPT is able to be used by other developers and their tools as well. And so it really made the news and revolutionized where AI is for the average person in their life. So let's talk about that by seeing an example first. So if you have no idea what AI is currently being used for by everyday people, here's a wonderful example. You can take a prompt, and a good prompt might have something like a noun, a verb, maybe an adjective, and a style of art. And you can just give a text prompt to an AI generator and generate an image, such as this wonderful cheeseburger cat. And it looks pretty realistic. So let's do a quick demonstration of that. So I tend to take things that I'm comfortable with or that I know and like and make them into prompts. So if you've never seen this before, here we go. This is actually Canva. For anybody who knows Canva, I like to use this tool to demonstrate because it's free for teachers to use. And there's an AI image generator built right in. So let's try this. A couple things I'm interested in. A drone flying over Chicago skyline. Hey, I live right by Chicago, with a sunset in the background. So I gave it a prompt of an idea of a thing and a verb and a place. And we can even pick a type of art. So I'll pick from the list of options that they have here. We'll go with retro anime. That sounds fun. We'll do create your own image. This one will just take a few seconds, and it's going to generate a couple of different options of images based on the prompt that I just gave it. There we go. Those are pretty cool. So for those of you who know Canva, it's an awesome design tool. And so now this is an opportunity to grab an image and use it in your design. I can pick a couple different ones. It's important to point out that this is not an image that it searched for off of Google. This is not something that was previously created that it went out and found. This was uniquely created using the search terms that I just did. And so I can actually click the create again button, and it'll try that process all over again and generate 4 totally different images, probably pretty similar since it's the same prompt. But I can do that as many times as I like until I find one that looks dramatic enough for my tastes, like this one right here. All right, so with that demonstration in mind, there we go. I like that one quite a bit. Might just save that one. With that demonstration in mind, you've now seen a text-to-image generator. Let's jump into a ChatGPT demo. So ChatGPT has been pretty popular on the news as well, because it's able to take a text prompt and it can speak to you in a fairly personable language and give you back results of your prompt. So for example, let's take a couple other things that are common to me. So I like Edgar Allan Poe, so let's pick him. Let's tell ChatGPT you are Edgar Allan Poe. Notice I don't have to worry too much about capitalization. It understands I'm a human and I'm imperfect. It'll fix that for me. Write a poem in your style about attending your child's first trumpet recital. My kid plays the trumpet. I recently did that, so that's relevant to me. Let's see what it comes up with. Right before our eyes, I won't read it to you. You guys are adults, you can see it. It writes in very similar style to Edgar Allan Poe, a poem about attending a trumpet recital. Bonus points if you're reading it in your head in like a Poe voice and accent. So really cool stuff. So not only, again, this is not just pulling something that exists on the internet, it's composing this right now as we speak. And I can regenerate that response and get a totally different response if I want, but I can even refine that. I can say now, change that into a Shakespearean. I don't know how to spell Shakespearean, but that's okay. It'll figure it out for me. Sonnet. I hit enter and it takes the content that it just used and rewrites it in a different format. So super fun tool, super fun rabbit hole that you can go down just with a couple of simple prompts like that. And I'm going to need an ELA teacher out there to tell me if this is iambic pentameter or not. It's been a while since I've had to actually read Shakespeare. But one thing I do know is I can turn it. This is my favorite thing to do with all my prompts. Turn it into a haiku. There you go. I remember that format, 5, 7, 5 syllables. Nailed it. So pretty powerful thing, pretty fun. There's a reason we don't do this right before February. We don't want people like cheating and writing, love letters for Valentine's Day using ChatGPT. Okay, we can't have you doing that. But there's a quick demonstration of the powerful tool that we now have at our disposal. So now that we've done some of that writing and some of that image generation, let's talk about why is this such a big deal right now? So AI obviously has been around, as we mentioned, over 70 years. What's with the current breakthrough that makes it different? Four things. One, it's generative. And what we mean by generative is it can produce new content. So it's not just a set of algorithms that are responding and doing preset things. It's actually generating unique content that's never been created before. Secondly, it uses natural language. So it can interact with people like a person would. So I can talk to it and I can give it prompts just in natural language. I don't have to overthink just the right kind of prompts like you might in some search engines. And I can just talk to it naturally and it'll talk back to me naturally. It's also refinable. As you saw, the prompt that I gave it, I don't have to start all the way from scratch if I want to change it. I can make it a refining of what I just gave it and have it zero in on exactly what I want. And then also the idea of being able to create an image, especially a high quality image just from a text prompt, is pretty unique. And now there's technologies coming out where you can give it an image and have it produce new images based on that image input, which is really cool. All right, so let's dive into AI a little bit, and then we'll talk about other uses and how it applies to your classroom. So just a really brief high-level overview of what is AI and how does all of that work, because I think it's relevant to how you're going to end up managing that for yourself and for your students as needed. Just one term that's important to know here is machine learning. And machine learning is the idea, it's a branch of AI, and it's the idea that data and algorithms can be written to imitate the way that humans learn, and it can help the machine gradually improve its accuracy. So the machine itself is learning, and you do something called train it to interact the way you want it to. Some examples of how this already exists in your everyday life is those Netflix recommendations, right? So you have a series of, you watch certain series or you watch certain shows, and it picks out characteristics of that show and recommends new things for you. And obviously the database is constantly being updated, so the technology has to be able to take these new inputs and make new recommendations on the fly. Self-driving cars, tech support chatbots, if you've ever had the joy of interacting with one of those are some examples of machine learning in action. So specific to ChatGPT, and what's another breakthrough is the idea of natural language processing. So that's another area within AI that focuses on how computers and humans interact using natural language. So rather than we as humans having to figure out what are the right inputs and the right way to talk to this device in order to give it what I want, we can just talk naturally, and it's a little more fluid and accessible to everybody. So essentially the machine is trained to know how we as humans communicate with each other and imitate it and be able to take commands in such a way. The other component is generative. So as I mentioned, generative AI is a specific kind of AI that has set algorithms that can generate new realistic looking content. So we're talking text, images, audio, even video from the training data. So what do we mean by training data? Well, this generative AI technology, it uses machine learning, which we mentioned earlier, to process very large amounts of data. So it's able to take tons and tons of data and process it quickly and be able to make predictions based on that data to produce something new. And so to get a little bit more specific, ChatGPT 3, which is the version, well, I think the version I was showing you is 3.5, but 3 was trained on 176 billion parameters and 570 gigabytes of data, all from books, from websites, from articles, from the internet. But the thing to remember is it's trained on all of this data and it learns to make patterns and connections, but it doesn't actually know the context of anything that it's saying. So a lot of people are concerned about, well, is it becoming sentient? Is AI like actually have a consciousness? It doesn't have any idea what it's saying. What it's actually doing is it's making predictions. Every time that it takes a prompt, it gives you the most likely start to its answer. And then after every word, it makes a prediction about what the most likely next word is going to be. And then it refines that, and it slowly but surely builds up this entire sentence and paragraph until it's got its full prediction out. So it doesn't know the context, but it is able to use all of that data to produce something that looks very realistic and very close to what we asked it for. So to kind of give you an idea of how that works, imagine you have a box of Legos, right? All different colors, shapes, types, and each of those Legos represents a small piece of information that the computer has learned from studying all these millions of examples. So it's now got all these building blocks. You come in and give it a prompt, something like create a picture of a tree, and it starts going back into its memory and saying, okay, what do trees look like? And it starts taking these bits and pieces of Legos. One of them might be a trunk, one of them might be a leaf, and it starts piecing them together into and trying different ways until it finally starts to look like what we recognize as a tree and what it's got in its data as being a tree. It keeps trying different combinations until it comes up with something that looks what we would call a tree. Okay, and it's the same thing if it's generating text. So it's able to analyze all of the Edgar Allan Poe poetry that was out there and make predictions about the style and the type of language and the order of words and produce something that's very similar. So to kind of give you an idea of the timeline, like this has ramped up big time in the last 10 years. If you just look at the type of AI pictures that were able to be generated just in 2014, and you kind of see the progression of the quality. All of these, none of these are real people. These are all AI generated images of people over time. And so another important feature to know about this presentation you just engaged with is that 90% of the text and images that I just shared with you were made by AI. In fact, almost all of those pictures were AI generated. Many of them were from a program called Midjourney. And much of the text was pulled from ChatGPT. I did some changing up of some wording and some reordering and some reorganizing, but it was essentially, and of course, some fact checking, but it was essentially all AI generated from prompts that I put together over time. And it's not just for text and images. There are audio generating AI programs as well. In fact, this is a really fun one. This podcast.ai is a podcast that is entirely generated by artificial intelligence. So what they do is they take a topic, and you can actually suggest topics, and they have the AI generate a podcast from the voice and the style of speech of a host, such as Oprah, on a topic. And all the audio is completely generated, and it does sound kind of eerily just like that person. If you're interested in podcasting in your classroom and using AI, there are two great tools that you can use. Adobe Podcast is one of them, and Podcastle is another one. Those are both linked, and you'll get these presentation slides at the end. They're both great for doing AI-powered editing, so kind of automating a lot of the processes you might do with the post-production of your podcasts. They're also great for video generation. So there's this company called Synthesia, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, that produces AI generated training videos. So you give them the content and the topic that you want them to create, and they create this AI generated avatar that reads off your training materials. Obviously, this is a pay to play type of deal or for profit, but it's really cool that that exists. If you want something a little less serious, but a ton of fun, there is a show out in the UK that I would call a reality show called Deepfake Neighbor Wars. And essentially, they have real actors acting out the part of a reality show, but they're not the actors you see here. So that's not Idris Elba, and that's not actually, why am I drawing a blank on her name? Kim Kardashian, that's right. And what they do is they act out this reality series, and but they completely do a face swap with the AI and a voice swap, and they have AI generated faces and voices that act out the script as if they are these actors and actresses, and it's really crazy. It's totally deep fake video. None of those actual famous celebrities are in it, but they made an entire series out of these deep fakes. Really cool. All right, so I see some questions about who owns, and that is a great question. We're going to actually get to who owns the content provided by AI a little bit later. So that's a great question. And do feel free to chime in the chat, as I see people are already doing. All right, so aside from making deep fake celebrity videos, what other industries are already using AI? So it's already in use in the automotive industry, as we mentioned, self-driving cars. The medical industry. In fact, there's a Twitter story, to the degree that you can believe something that you find on Twitter, but it's a pretty interesting read about a person who claims that they were able to save their dog using diagnoses from ChatGPT. I don't know that I would recommend, that being your first course of action, but it was interesting to see how it was able to process so many obscure different symptoms and rapidly come up with some possible diagnoses. Gaming, so developing more realistic opponents to play against. If you're a gamer, you might know that sometimes playing against the computer gets boring because they're very predictable. So AI is helping make those gamers virtual gamers more realistic. Agriculture, so I recently was able to meet with someone from a company who had used drones to take imagery of crops and be able to use AI to analyze problems that they saw cropping up, see what I did there, with the crops, and address them a lot earlier. And then in finance, obviously, there's a lot of prediction that is involved in the finance industry. So using AI to be able to make predictions and better invest money. There's an interesting article here about ChatGPT's successes on the bar exam as well. So when you get these slides, take a minute to read through how ChatGPT did on the bar exam. Interesting stuff. All right. So who are the big names and big players in AI? So I mentioned OpenAI. They were really the ones that burst onto the scene in the last year. Immediately got the attention of all the big players, Google, Adobe, Microsoft, Apple, including, and Elon Musk all jumped on board and said, we're going to start developing AI bots of our own for a variety of different reasons. And you can actually sign up to test a few of them out. Google and Adobe, I know off the top of my head, you can sign up for a free trial of theirs. All right, so now that I've thoroughly either excited or terrified you with what's out there and what's possible, let's talk about how can we harness this for something in our everyday life. So when I say everyday life, I'm going to show you in my work life a few ways that I've used it as a trainer of educators, and that's going to transition into how you might use it in your classroom. So a couple quick examples we'll rip through. This is a really simple but powerful one, summarizing and simplifying information. I was putting together an article, and it was steps on how to form an esports club. And I had 14 different steps, and I just couldn't figure out how to organize them better because 14 was too much for this blog that we were writing. So I said, you know what, ChatGPT, I want you to summarize this list and break them down into 5 categories for me. And just like that, it took these 5 categories. And when I looked at it, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are the 5 categories these would fall under. So saved me a lot of cognitive effort and a lot of spinning my wheels in order to get things organized quickly. I also like it for creating titles quickly. So I had to create a title for a technology summit that I'm putting together. So I asked ChatGPT, give me a good title for a technology summit. And hey, it threw something out. Empowering educators navigating the future of technology in the classroom. Sounds a little cliche, but that works. It's a start. But I really like the idea of refining it. So I kept asking it. I said, hey, give me 3 more examples. And so it gave me, well, it failed a bit. It gave me 2. So I said, please give me more examples. And so it continued to give me examples. So it turned into more of a brainstorming session, which I liked because then I can piece together the things I liked and get the answer that I'm really looking for. And I actually pushed refining it even more. And I said, this is going to be in North Cook County, so please add the words North Cook. And so it spit out a few examples for me that had North Cook in it. And this continued on and continued on. And I asked it to focus on a certain topic. And so it did that for me. And there comes a point where eventually you're like, you're doing more work asking it to do stuff than if you just wrote it yourself. So this might be one of those cases where that happened. But I did want to show how you're able to refine results over and over until you get to the thing that you're looking for. All right. Yes, Matt, I see you in the chat. I think everyone in our organization, when we started our March Madness brackets, we all just rushed to ChatGPT to try to find the funniest fantasy basketball names that we could. I came up with the Dunkin' Donuts. Well, ChatGPT did, and that's the one that I picked. It was perfect. All right. It's also a good solution to writer's block on that note. So I had this sentence in my mind that I really liked, and it just sounded way too fancy. I didn't like it. A lot of $100 words where a $5 word is all I needed. And so I asked it to rewrite the sentence to be less cliche. And sure enough, it did that for me. So again, a writing aid, again, taking my own writing, but finding a good way to refine it quickly and easily. All right, a couple other examples. In addition to writing actual meaningful things, I like some good corny jokes, some dad jokes. And so I was doing a drone workshop and I needed to include something about taking students to new heights. So I asked it to do that for me. And sure enough, it came up with their newfound knowledge of drones, teachers are ready to soar to new heights and take their students on a flying adventure. Perfect. Thank you. Sounds just like my writing. So that's a couple of things that I jumped in and started with when I was just getting going with ChatGPT. But I want to push a little farther and show you beyond just kind of the tool for helping your writing, how can it be useful to you as an educator and possibly to your students as well. So I actually asked it to do the following: write an NGSS aligned science lesson in the 5E model format for 2nd graders. And sure enough, because it was trained on data from the internet, it knows what the NGSS standards are. It understands what the 5E model is, and it was able to, and this is actually like a gift that I took of it creating all of this live. It was actually able to create all of that. I've got linked in the presentation. I dropped it all in the Google Doc so you can see an example and some of the pros and cons, but it has the components of a lesson plan. It has materials, has a standard. It shows something about the water cycle, and it dropped in some general activities to go in the 5E model. Now, is this ready to go tomorrow? Maybe not. Maybe I do some refining, but it sure saved me a whole lot of time on idea generation, as well as just the formatting and the logistics of getting a document like this together and getting some ideas down on paper. Another idea, if you want to step away from ChatGPT a bit, there is a tool called CuraPod that you might like quite a bit. And CuraPod is more of a teacher-focused version of what I just showed you. So if we actually go to CuraPod, and I'm probably going to need to log in, you can actually generate lessons right there on the spot. So let's say I wanted to generate a lesson on let's do photosynthesis. And let's say, yeah, we keep it for 9th grade. I can copy paste standards if I wanted to, but I'm just going to go ahead and click do its magic and let it do its thing. This will take a few minutes. So I'll show you what the results are gonna end up looking like. So CuraPod actually creates for you a full set of slides. It's got objectives, it's got content on there for you to teach from, it's got prompts, and it even has some built-in teacher tools like timers and a place for you to collect student responses right there in it. Let's see. Oh, there we go. It's done. And it's created exactly what I said. It's got some prompts. It's got some background information I can use to teach from. It's got some places where students can interact. And you can even have it add in brain breaks and assessments and other great stuff like that. So again, is this done and ready to go? Are you just going to teach from a set of slides and that's it? Probably not, but man, that really did a great job of giving me the backbone of a lesson that I can get started with. So that's just a quick example of how that could work. There's another tool called Education Copilot that is worth taking a look at that does some similar types of lesson generation for you. So a couple to look up on your own time. All right, another great use of ChatGPT is quickly developing practice problems. Before I was science and STEM teacher, I spent 2 years teaching math as well. And, you can never get enough problems for students to practice on. So, or sometimes you just need a quick exit ticket for them. So I put in here, create 3 7th grade math problems that require an understanding of PEMDAS and the distributive property. And sure enough, it gave me 3 of those problems right away. So I can just copy paste that. And now I've got my assessment ready to go. But you know what? Because it's been a while since I did this, I made sure that I asked it for the answers as well. Let me jump down there because I think it popped up behind everything. There we go. So I said, give me the answers to those 3 problems. And it said, sure, here's the answers. So now the teacher can make sure that the teacher is grading things properly. So I had to make sure I did that. Another example that I really love is generating leveled text. So when I taught science, one of the topics I loved to teach was Pluto and how it was demoted from a planet down to a dwarf planet. The challenge I had was finding an article that was going to be accessible and readable by my students whose reading levels ranged from high school all the way down to early elementary. And so I spent a lot of time searching for articles. They didn't always have the exact same content as one another. Sometimes they weren't very copy pastable and they didn't format well when I printed them. It was a lot of time spent. So you know what I did? I found the one article that I liked. I copy pasted the text in and I said, rewrite this at a 4th grade level with at least 200 words. Then I realized I wanted some vocabulary to be included. And I said, please keep the text above. I keep saying please. I don't actually have to say ChatGPT, please. It doesn't care one way or the other. Keep the text above, but include the words orbit, gravitational pull, and solar system. And so it rewrote it and made sure to include those words so that I had those vocabulary words in there. So I know that there are curriculum and there are ed tech tools that you can buy that have these things built in already. But if you don't have access to those, or you just need something that's not in your curriculum, and you've got this great article and you just need it at 3 different levels, that's a quick way to get that text that you need ready to go. All right. And yeah, you hear me. It's like built into me to say please. I can't help it. I don't know. Maybe it's a Midwest thing. We're polite, I guess. All right. So here's another example of level text. Simplifying text. So I might find something in a textbook or a curriculum that I have that is good, but man, it is just kind of dense reading. So maybe I want to simplify it and shorten it and make it at a certain level. I can do that. At the same time, I can ask it to generate an essay for me. So maybe I want to have my students see a model essay before they get started writing. Or maybe I want my students to have some practice doing some editing or doing some revising without having to do the writing first. Let's just get them used to the idea of revising someone else's writing. I can have them generate it. By the way, I can tell it to generate this text with spelling and grammar errors, and it will do that for me. So if you want to just quickly produce text for students that to have to correct, you can have it produce incorrect writing. Another great use of this is perspective and tone. So in social studies, one of the big concepts is multiple perspectives on history, right? So, and I don't want to create any controversy or any fights. This is not my personal opinion. I just wanted to pick something a bit controversial that's out there. So I told ChatGPT, you are inventor and scientist Nikola Tesla. Write a brief and polite but sternly serious letter to Thomas Edison about copyright infringement. And I thought the fact that some of your concerns might be plagiarism with ChatGPT, I thought it would be kind of an ironic use of ChatGPT to write a letter about copyright infringement. And sure enough, it writes it in that tone. It writes it in the perspective, and it is polite and sternly serious. And so this is an opportunity for students, for you as a teacher, maybe to produce some texts that students can analyze and learn from. And also kind of compare it to how they might have written it if they were going to write their own as well. It's also great for creating outlines and agendas. So if you've got an event you're planning or a presentation you're doing, and you just need to think about what would an outline of this event look like or an agenda, you can ask it to do that. I asked it to write an outline of a workshop on Minecraft for me, and it gave me a good base. I filled in the details that I needed, but it's got that organizational piece done, and some of the cognitive heavy lifting was taken care of for me. I mentioned brainstorming. I think that's a great way of doing things. So here's a couple ideas of brainstorming. And the big idea here is, you could Google search for some of these things, but then you're going to be clicking on links and going through and avoiding ads and like trying to sift through and find just the right things to match what you're looking for. Whereas this is almost like an aggregator that'll find those topics and quickly give you the exact information you're looking for. However, a thing to remember that I'm not sure I mentioned earlier, in the training that ChatGPT was given, it was only given information up to, I think, late 2021. So one thing to keep in mind, we'll talk about later, is that you're not going to get relevant current events. And so finally here, this is one of my favorites as a tech and STEM guy. You can use ChatGPT to write code. So this was Python code that I asked it to write for me to have it autonomously fly one of my drones in an octagon with a 5-foot radius. And certainly looks like it's going to get the job done. I will remind you here that it's using internet sources from pre-2022. And so, if you've got coding or languages that have developed after that, this particular tool won't help with that. And I also want to make sure you're double checking that code before you're running it, because remember, it's using predictions and what it thinks will come next, but it doesn't have the ability to actually test that code and know if what it wrote is correct. So there's a couple other ideas here that are listed. You guys can go through these and try these on your own. One thing that's really interesting that a lot of people don't know is that it can actually create tables of data. So it can actually create a copyable data table. So let me give you an example. I gave it a prompt that said, create a table that can be copied into Excel with a list of every president of the United States in order. And not only did it give me that list, but it is actually a copy pastable table. So if I highlight all of that, copy it, go to a new Google Sheet, not Excel, sorry, I can paste it and it gives me that table. So you can actually begin databases or start spreadsheets straight from this tool as well. All right. So there's a few other tools that I mentioned or that I did not mention, and they're linked here. Gradescope is supposed to be one that helps you with giving feedback to students. I have seen other people talk about, I haven't tried this one, but talk about you can actually feed a rubric to ChatGPT and then copy paste work in and tell the program to grade the work based on that rubric. I haven't tried that one, but I'd love to hear from somebody who has. And there's a few others here that I like. Hyperwrite is one that I use. It's a Chrome extension that runs in your background constantly and learns how you type so that when it tries to make suggestions for what to say, it does it in your voice and style of writing, which could be a good thing, could be a scary thing, depending, but it's a pretty cool idea. So those are just a few. There are such a wide variety of apps and sites and tools popping up. It would be meaningless for me to try to list them all because tomorrow there will be 25 more. I will say that a great deal of them, pretty much all of them that I've come across using the technology are immediately going to paid versions. So those of you who have been around a while like me, you might remember the glory days where ed tech tools were pretty much free and unlimited, and at some point they may want you to pay for something or advanced features. Most of these I've come across, a lot of them are like immediately like, hey, try it for 7 days, and then you got to pay, and you have to put a credit card in up front to make sure that they can try to charge you. So just a warning right now before you go too crazy, make sure you're reading that fine print on the pricing before you go into any of those apps. But yeah, so that's a thing. All right. So with that said, and those of you who know some apps that you're using, please continue to throw them in the chat because there's always some good ones out there that I haven't heard of or others haven't heard of. All right. So with
Real
that
quick,
said,
Eric.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's a question in the Q&A, and just to clarify, the question in the Q&A is, there are so many ChatGPT versions. What's the difference? So to clarify, ChatGPT is an AI tool for writing, right? It is one tool, correct?
Yeah, well, and there are multiple versions. So the one that
Okay.
most of us are that I'm using is ChatGPT 3. There is now, the thing to remember is when that was released, it immediately went to 1 million users, I think, within a matter of days. And so they've released now ChatGPT 4, which is trained on a great deal more data. It's supposedly less likely to give any bad answers. It is also a pay-to-play tool, of course, right? So there are different versions, and I'm sure we're likely to see more and more of them crop up. But when I'm just saying ChatGPT, I'm referring to version 3, which is the one that we're accessing here for free.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. Another question, is there a good phone app version of ChatGPT that you found in your research yet?
I don't know of if they have an app. That's a good question. I don't know if they have an app. I know that my understanding is that other apps are able to build upon their technology. So a lot of the ones that you're going to find are out there. I'm sure a quick Google search, we can look and see if there's a ChatGPT specific app. I've always used it on the browser though. So I'm curious out there if anybody watching and listening has an answer to that as well.
Thanks, Eric.
Yep. And I see a couple of good comments in there. Bing Chat is your favorite, less buggy than Chat GPT. Yep. And I'm going to share some of the downfalls and limitations that I've experienced as well. So I'm glad you guys are bringing those up. Okay. So with that said, some of the limitations and challenges, and just want to double check. You guys are still seeing my screen. Yes. Everybody's still seeing my, Matt, are we still seeing the slides? Yep. Okay, good. All right. So what are some challenges? So first challenge I want to talk about is not maybe something that affects us as the users, but thinking about where all of this data came from, and a pretty healthy debate that's happening right now is the implication on artists and their work and copyright. And so the question that comes up is it fair for these programs to be training their AI using copywritten work? So remember, when they're going on the internet or they're opening books and they're opening all this data, some of it is available to see, but it doesn't mean that it has commercial rights for anybody to use. However, if AI bots are being trained on works of art from artists who have not given license for it to be used commercially, is it then okay for the AI to produce results based on that work? So if this tool learned what a tree looks like from a copywritten painting of a tree, is that fair? Can someone else now sell their chatbot using a program that was trained on that? So that's a tricky and thorny question that's very much up for debate right now and something to be thinking about. Another one that came up is who owns those AI generated products? And the interesting thing is, if you dig into some of the terms of use of some of them, they do address that in different ways. I know that Midjourney Canva that I showed you earlier, they all have statements about the license of the work that's produced. I don't know that there's been enough time for there to be legislation that that usually sets that precedent with that kind of thing. So I think the jury's still out on that kind of thing as well. So these are interesting questions that are still kind of up in the air, and I don't know that I have a solid answer to yet, but are definitely worth thinking about. And if your students are old enough to discuss, this is a good point of discussion to have with them as well. I mean, we're already probably as teachers still dealing with the idea of you can't just Google things and just copy paste or grab whatever picture you see off Google that exists. So it's a whole nother realm to talk about something that's AI generated, but based on the work of others. So it's an interesting conversation. I will say there's a couple of interesting articles on that topic. One was about an artist who won a photo prize, but then rejected it because his entry was AI generated, purposefully so, just to kind of prove a point and get that conversation going. So that's an interesting read. There's also an article here about how AI was able to finish Beethoven's unfinished symphony. And so what does that mean for the future of music and music creators and even the, the great music of the past and how we look at that. So these are implications that, again, I don't say that we have an answer to, but are worth discovering and discussing. All right, a couple other limitations of the technology as we have it now. Fact check, self-check. AI can definitely generate fake news by incorrectly piecing together real information or events, either purposefully because of someone putting in a prompt attempting to do so, or accidentally. For example, here was a picture that circulated online of Donald Trump being arrested by a large group of police officers during a violent protest. The arrest happened. It was nothing like this, but imagine how this kind of image being created by somebody and circulated online could lead to big implications in the real world. So a little bit of concern there. I'll give you a less scary, but equally, I would say, intense version of that happened to me. I was asked to write an article for our newsletter about a makerspace, and so I chose Oak Park River Forest High School, whose makerspace I had just recently visited, and I was going to write this 500-word article about their makerspace and the technology they had there. And I said, you know what? This is a great chance to see what can ChatGPT do? Can it help me? Can it get me started? And so I had it go through this prompt of write a 500-word article about this makerspace, specifically naming the high school, include examples of technology they have and ways that students use it. And what do you know? It spit out an article that was 400 and some odd words, had a nice little opening. It mentioned a lot of the technologies that, yep, this makerspace has. Probably not hard to guess at because most makerspaces have similar technologies. And it was actually a good start. I used some of the intro and some of the transitions, and I put in my own experiences and my own interviews to make it real, but it was a good writing aid. But I'm glad that I read really closely because there was this part right here that said, one of the most exciting examples of student projects is a group of engineering students who use the 3D printer to create a working model of a prosthetic hand. The students work closely with a local prosthetics clinic to design and test their creation, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? This makerspace had just opened like 2 months earlier, and I had been over there a couple of times and talked to the team. That did not ever happen, but it confidently told me that it did happen. So luckily I read that. Had to do a little bit of searching to figure out where in the world it got that kind of idea from. Here was the best thing that I could figure out to source that. There was an article from 5 years ago about a graduate of that high school who's now in his 30s or maybe 40s, who for a living creates prosthetic hands and teaches kids how to do the same thing. But he had not done this at the high school. And this wasn't something that happened during his time in high school. So my best guess is that is the article that it pulled that thought from, and it mashed it up with its other information and predictive powers and created that. So that's a really interesting concern, and especially a concern for if your students decide to start using these tools, that just like you can't trust everything on the internet, you have to know that these AI tools as they are now aren't able to really fact check themselves really well. I'm sure that will get better, but as of right now, they also lack some domain specific and like current knowledge. So again, remember, ChatGPT was trained on data up to September 2021. These are actual quotes it gave me when I asked it about these things. And so it's not going to have knowledge about about everything in the world, and it won't have knowledge of current events, but it will try to make guesses and will say them confidently. So definitely fact check. Here's a point that I think is being brought up in the chat as well, is the idea of bias and morality. So there are filters and there are limitations that the makers of these programs try to put on them, and you'll find that you might run into some blocks, right? Sometimes you'll try to search something and it'll say, nope, I can't do that. Sorry, that has a term that I can't use, or that I can't produce results for. But remember, the AI can only be as ethical and enlightened as the programmers and the data that it reviews. So whatever it's trained on, whatever it learns, that's going to be as close as it can get to any concept of morality. And so definitely the filters are great, but unconscious bias may reveal itself in those results. And here's an example. I used one of the generators to try to create a cyborg teacher. And it was interesting the results I got and what they might mean. And I don't know that I can interpret this in any way, but I'll share it with you because I think it's interesting. I put in a teacher cyborg, and I got what kind of looks like a cyborgish teacher, right? I thought it would be a good image for my slides, but I noticed that all four of them seem to be female form, and they all look pretty similar in terms of demographic. So I was like, all right, well, what happens if I change to a different art style? And I changed art style, still seem to get mostly female forms. Ethnicities may be in question, but all fairly similar skin tone. So that kind of raised an eyebrow, like, all right, so what is it trained to know and to associate with teacher? But then here's what I did. I changed it to say a teacher leading a class on artificial intelligence, and suddenly I got all male teachers. I'm going to assume by this suit jacket that I see here that hand, which by the way, AI is not great at making hands. I don't know if you've seen any of the jokes out there, but like for some reason it makes these weird hands with 4 fingers or 6 fingers. But at any rate, suddenly I got all male teachers. And again, is that based on the data that it has, or is it based on subconscious bias from things that it's reading in its training? I don't know. But interestingly enough, when I just said a teacher, I got the most diverse results in terms of race and gender. There's only 4 pictures, so there's only so much to choose from, but I just found it interesting, the set of results that I got. I can't make a value statement on why or how that happened, but something to think about is that, again, this is not a totally unbiased set of data it's going to be trained on, because we lived in a world that's full of bias. And so you have to be careful of the results you're getting as well. All right, and on that note, a last and interesting limitation is the idea of hallucinations, which is essentially kind of like the fact-checking part, but something that's been well documented is that AI can confidently produce responses that do not at all match its training data. And there are several examples of this in the news where it just kind of went off, the AI just went off the rails and started doing things it was not trained to do, or confidently talking about things it wasn't meant to do, or creating pictures like this. That we don't really know why it did what it did. And there's really not a great understanding about why it's happening. Supposedly newer versions of the technology are going to reduce some of that, but time will tell. All right, so what does that mean? Does that mean that AI is going to make jobs obsolete? Are artists no longer going to have a role because everything is going to be AI created? Here's a great meme that demonstrates some of the limitations that maybe make you not worry so much that that's happening quite yet. It has a hard time with hands and fingers, but things are getting better. Don't forget, we are in the initial stages of this round of AI development. Don't forget what the early internet was like, those of you who are old enough to remember logging on to sites that look like this, okay? So think about this and how far we've come in our internet and browser usage to this day. We're still in those early times. Like some of you might even remember back in the day, in the late 1900s, when the internet would actually make noise when you connected to it. I don't know if you ever had the joy of experiencing that, but I definitely remember that sound, and I remember a lot of these. Our concept of what a search engine is, what a website looks like, what communications look like, what memes look like, has come a long way. So these AI tools are still at this stage. They're at the initial stage of all this. So we have to understand that some of those imperfections are going to get better. Some of these some of the kind of weird results are going to improve, and it's going to end up becoming a lot more pervasive and a part of our everyday life, just the way a lot of these tools have evolved to do the same thing. All right. So with that said, I want to make sure I keep this under an hour, and we're coming up on that time. So a couple of quick tips to prepare you for AI in your classroom. First thing to know is ChatGPT specifically states that you have to be 18 to create an account. So in terms of being able to use it with your students, that's probably not going to be an easy option. Of course, we know that our students, once they go home, may or may not abide by those expectations that the companies put forth. So just something to think about for your own class, though. The important thing to remember is we've been here before with revolutionary technology. So those of you who have been teaching long enough to remember when the internet started making its way to classrooms, when Google became a popular thing that we had access to, when Wikipedia started being a source that we had to tell kids, hey, Wikipedia is not a reliable source in and of itself. When we started having one-to-one devices and take-home devices, cell phones started making their way into classrooms, and wearable watches that work as cell phones, social media, all of these have been technologies that have slowly made their way towards classrooms. And at first they're scary, they're terrifying. This is the end of education as we know it. But you know what? Eventually we manage it. We figure out how to use it as a tool. We're constantly evolving in how we manage the pros and cons. And just keep in mind that there was a time, this is a really interesting article, there was a time when TV was the scary new technology, when radio, telegraph, the printing press, even education in general were thought of as scary new things that were going to destroy the world as we knew it. So this is just the next generation of that. And I think if we take that with a grain of salt and just prepare ourselves, it'll be a lot easier. So tip number one, become familiar with the tools. I've got a couple that I talked about today, as well as a couple of articles with a bunch more. Again, trying to give you a list of tools when they're exploding in numbers is a tricky thing, but there's a couple of good ones being shared in the chat as well for you to get started with. And I don't want to overwhelm you if this is all new territory for you. So just start with a few and get comfortable with them. AI detection. So there's a few tools that are popping up that are claiming to fight AI with AI, right? So GPT-0 was designed to catch ChatGPT created text. There's Rightful, Turnitin has even included an AI detector now. I'm going to just use the old Star Wars quote and tell you, I don't know if these are the droids that you are looking for, because in the bot versus bot wars that are evolving, the AI detectors, from what I've seen and I heard from others, they're hit or miss. They can catch blatant, like copy paste directly what it says, but if students do enough to change some of the text or massage the data that it gets a little bit, they can slip through those detectors. I'm sure it will evolve, and I'm sure there will continue to be a battle of better AI created text and better detectors, but to just rely on those alone, I don't think is going to be sufficient. So that brings me to my next tip, is trying to design your activities proactively with the thought in mind that this technology exists. So asking students to require verifiable sources, and asking them to, discuss their learning a little bit, asking them to reflect on what they put together to show that they really understood what they built or wrote is helpful. Requiring them to have personal and authentic examples, requiring them to show their own creativity. And I would even throw out there reconsidering homework. So can you send homework home if you're not sure if the student is actually the one generating it? There are certain tasks that you might say, I just want you to work on right here in front of me. I think my numbering got a little funky there, so apologies, but my next tip is just embrace it. The best thing to do is not to demonize it, not to say we're just not going to think about it, but to embrace it and talk about it. Discuss with students what responsible use looks like and what it doesn't look like. So what is it allowed for? Is it okay to brainstorm with ChatGPT? Is it okay to get ideas? Is it okay to write an outline? But what is it not used for, right? Your own writing has to be the final product. If you have a course syllabus, if you're like a secondary teacher, here's a great article for ideas on how you can include language in your syllabus that provides for different allowance levels of ChatGPT in the course. But think about ways to incorporate it as a learning tool. Some of the things that I shared earlier can be used as tools for students to learn from. And lastly, I'll just kind of say, keep in mind equity. As much as I want you to embrace it, also keep in mind the other side of things of who has access to these tools at home and who doesn't. So if you're giving students if you're a forward thinking leading edge and you're like, I want to have my students use this for good, also keep in mind, do they have access to the technology? Do they have reliable internet? Do some students have better pay to play apps and tools that other students don't have access to? And are we inadvertently taking a great opportunity and making it an equity issue?